everyone. This is Susan Connor with the Early Intervention Training Program, and I just wanted to welcome you to the CFC Procedure Manual webinar focused specifically on transition. This is the last of our planned webinars. It's the second of the webinars focused on transition. So, like I had said on past webinars, in planning for the rollout of the revised CFC procedure manual, CFC managers had specifically requested some focused information and review on the on the transition pieces of the process. So that's what we'll be doing today. I would like to say that we've had a little change up. Chelsea Guillen has done most all of the webinars to this point, but today we have with us Maria Maddox. So Maria Maddox is a training consultant with the Early Intervention Training Program. She has been with us for many years, and she is integrally involved in providing transition trainings around the state, as well as working with the Transition Guidance Committee with the Illinois State Board of Ed. So we're thrilled that she's with us today. We also have Alyssa Jones with us today, who is helping us out in the background to manage the technology piece of this, as well as any questions that may come into the chat box. So as we get going, I just want to remind you guys, I think everybody is pretty up to speed on how to use the chat box. I think you guys have mastered this by this time, but just want to remind you to put any questions or clarifications that you need in that chat box. Anne Freiberg with the Department of Human Services is on with us again today, and will be on to help clarify any questions that we can today. And then again, we will take all of the questions back, and anything that we couldn't answer today or from the previous webinars, we will be pulling together some answers for with the Bureau and getting that out to everybody. Just a final reminder that you can move that chat box anywhere you'd like on your screen to make it more comfortable for yourself as you're participating in the webinar. So this is just a way to check in. I think most of you guys know how to use the polling function, but we will be using the polling function today. So if you could just take a minute and answer this really tough question: what color are your eyes? And you can use the little A that's up near your name to respond to the poll. Okay. Looks like the answers are slowing. So we can go ahead and put up the poll results. And there they are. So it seems like everybody has got this down now, but make sure that you use that polling function up near the top when you are ready to respond to a poll question. And last but not least, again, we will do a post-session survey, as well as create certificates based on that survey, along with the rosters that the CFC managers have been sharing with us. So I just urge everyone, I know we've gotten a lot of requests for people who have not completed the survey in time. I just urge everyone to please do their best to get that survey in, get it done today. We will put up in the chat box at the end of the webinar today the survey link, so you can click on it right there. It takes just a few minutes, or we will send it to the CFC managers and they'll be sharing it with you guys. So without further ado, I think I will pass this off to Maria.
Susan. Hello everyone, and welcome as well. And I just wanted to let you know that we are going to be covering a few different things today within transition. We are going to look at the procedure manual and talk about some of the new changes that are in this new edition. We will review some of the things that you have been doing that have been different over the last year or so, as well as refreshing some of the things that have always been there. So we'll kind of cover all of it. We will look through and talk a little bit about tips to support the families that you are working with through transition. And as always, we will look at your questions and try to provide any supports and that you might need during this webinar, as well as you go out and do your work in the field. So let's see here. So our primary goals, just kind of to refresh, the primary goals of the transition process is to ensure continuity of services. In order to do that, we need to do what we can to minimize any disruptions to the family system and to promote the child being able to function in the natural environment for our program and the least restrictive environment for Part B programs. As we look towards ensuring continuity of services between EI and Part B, we can do that by planning early. We can do some of the more formal planning related to transition as early as 9 months before the child turns 3, but at least 6 months before they turn 3. As a parent, early planning is always helpful, and as we know in working with the families that we serve, these children turn 3 really fast. And the more lead time that we can give families, the more comfortable they will be with the transition process. As part of that preparation and planning, we do need to do some education with families and let them know that continuity of services doesn't necessarily mean the same services. Services in the school are going to look a little bit different in amount, in quality, and type. So letting families know that that there is going to be a little bit of difference is always a benefit. Also in that regard, even just the differences between the focuses of the program, the developmental program for Part C, the educationally based program for Part B, and how those are provided within those different programs. So families having that information ahead of time so they can start thinking about what the next steps are for their child is very, very beneficial. So we are going to look at a little bit of the timelines and the processes that you do. So as we go through a time with the child in early intervention, every time we have IFSP meetings, we should be talking about the transition process. Not necessarily transition to school, but transition at whatever is going to happen at age 3. School being one of the main places that children transition to, but there are other places that children transition, other services they transition to as well. But we should be talking about that from that very initial IFSP to every 6-month review and annual. Also, when we do that, we are hoping to ensure that families are prepared for the transition decisions that they are going to have to make. Our services end at 3, and for some families that comes as a big, not necessarily shock, but it is certainly a big change in their routine. And it is a significant change in the types, the amount, and the delivery of services. So putting your child on a school bus and letting them be away is a huge adjustment. Some families also need to know that there are other programs within their communities. That school isn't always the only option available to them. Sometimes we kind of think about 3 leading right into school, but there are community programs. Some families choose to do private therapy. Some choose to also have a break. And letting families know that there are other options and how to plan for those options are all part of that continuity of services. Great. We do have, while we talk about the transition process at every IFSP, at some point we need to formally talk about what are you going to do when the child turns 3. And those discussions need to start at least 6 months prior to the child's 3rd birthday. We can start at that IFSP meeting that occurs sometime after they're 2, but before they turn 6 months. 2 years, 6 months. So you've got a window of time there to start that formal process. Some of the responsibilities that we have in this process really does revolve around encouraging and supporting families. You do that when you share with them the When I'm 3 book. You do that when you are talking with providers and being positive about the options that are available to them either at school or in the community. Also, part of our responsibilities are to help the family learn about their child's strengths and needs. We talk about that at every IFSP meeting, but now we have to start thinking about how are those strengths of benefit in the educational setting. How are those going to transfer over into more community-based services? Also, part of your responsibilities is just really to learn how transition's handled in the communities that you serve. We know that every school district does something different. Every school district has different options, and they all want to do it their way. So learning how each community handles, or co-op, or whatever local education agency that you work with handles transition, and communicating with those programs so that it is a smooth transition between the 2 programs. Sometimes there's some give and take as to who's going to do what and when and how that's going to work. But as long as you know how each school district is handling those things, that will make things a lot smoother for you and those families. Again, we talked about making sure that families understand the differences. You're going to have to probably tell them this several times because it is just different, and they're used to you coming in. They're used to providers coming in and providing services, and knowing that they're not going to be there to see what's happening is a huge adjustment. Okay. Great. Some other responsibilities that you have are to share information with the local education agency. That means getting consent to release information. Before we can share any IFSP information, any evaluation information, we have to have consent. But in order for the LEA to be able to do their part in the smooth transition, they have to have information in a timely manner. Another responsibility that we have is that we need to have participation in the Exit IFSP meeting, where we are summarizing the child's development over the course of their time in early intervention, looking at, again, the transition plan. So if we have full participation from the team in that IFSP meeting, that last meeting, that kind of just wraps things up for us within early intervention. It also provides you with a sense of closure, as well as the providers with a sense of closure, in addition to the parents, of course. All right. Upon request of the family, we can also attend the IEPs. Now, part of our responsibilities in attendance of that IFSP is to provide family support. We're not there as advocates. If we do feel that as service coordinators or staff, if you feel like the family needs to have an advocate there, then that would be one of the resources that you would want to find for them to help them locate an advocate. But most of the time, families are just looking for support. And knowing that they've got someone who knows their child well, who's been with them through the first part of their child's life, and can reassure them that things are going to be fine, and the school district has the same interest that we did in early intervention, and that is what's in the best interest of that child. All right. So it looks like we are at our first poll, and I would just like to see what you all think. Are early intervention services identical to early childhood special education services? True or false? Let's see what you come up with. Looks like we're getting some good responses here. Let's see. What do you think? Hey, how about that? It's different. Who knew? How about that? So, all right, everybody said false, that they are very different. So thank you very much for participating in that poll. School districts have some responsibilities related to transition as well, and that is to participate in all aspects of the transition planning. From the time that they are aware of the child and have a consent to and have received information, they need to be a part of that process, so so that we can have that transition be smooth. LEAs also need to attend local EI and community meetings. So that means your LIC coordinators, for LIC meetings, they should be hopefully attending and participating in those LIC meetings, or any other community meetings that that we have that are to benefit children and families in this age range that we're working with. The more that we can have participation from the local education agencies, the more likely it is that cooperation will be strong and services will be more coordinated. Another aspect of their responsibilities is to participate in the transition planning conference. This is a big one. We've all known this has always been in the rule from the beginning of time, probably, that the LEA has a responsibility of participating in this transition planning conference. How it is done may be different from CFC to CFC, from school district to school district, but there should always at least be one representative from a school district at the transition planning conference. And we're going to talk about the transition planning conference in more detail here in a little bit. All right. Another responsibility that the school district does have is to determine eligibility for Part B services and have an IEP in place by that child's 3rd birthday. This is one of the coveted rights for children who are part of early intervention, is to have that IEP in place by their 3rd birthday, which is different than children who are not part of early intervention. So this is one of those rights that families need to know about and that needs to take place, which is another reason why we do start the transition process early for children who have summer birthdays or children who have some complex medical or needs that the school district is going to need to have a little bit more planning time to figure out how they're going to support that child, so that they can have that IEP in place by that child's 3rd birthday. All right. So this is one of the places that we'll stop and see how folks are doing. Doesn't look like I'm seeing any questions. Susan, what do you think?
I have not received any questions, and there's none in the chat box currently. We can give them another few seconds. Sometimes they trickle in at the last minute if people particularly are participating in a group and having some conversations about anything related to what we talked about. So if you guys have any questions, put them in. If not, Maria, I think we can move on, and we'll catch up with questions on the next round.
All right, and I would like to just make a point that I'm worried that I'm talking fast, so if I am and I need to slow down, just type it in the chat box and I will slow down. Looks like we do have one question. How long before a child is 3 can we have an exit IFSP meeting? We are going to talk about that, but the short answer is within 120 days of the child's 3rd birthday. But we're going to talk more about the different meetings that occur during the transition process here as we go along. So thank you, Emily. Okay. Transition. For a toddler that might be eligible for preschool, the definition of that is a child that is in EI, 27 months of age, that has not yet met or achieved their IFSP outcomes. These are children that might be potentially eligible for preschool services under Part B. This is actually, it seems like a definition that is like, well, kind of duh, of course we know that. But this is actually very important because when we start looking at some of the different processes related to when children are referred, this is going to affect some of the things that you might be doing a little bit differently than you have been doing. So any toddler that might be eligible for preschool services is any toddler that is in EI at 27 months of age that has not yet met or achieved their outcomes. So related to timeline, we're going to kind of go back and forth to timeline. So the first timeline that we talk about is talking about transition of every IFSP. The next thing that actually happens, which is kind of behind the scenes that most folks, unless you are intimately involved with this, aren't even aware of. So around 27 months, there is information, child find information, that is shared between VHS and Illinois State Board of Education. The information includes the child's EI number, their name, their date of birth, their parent information. It does not include any health information or anything like that. It's strictly very basic child find information. This list is pulled from Cornerstone data by DHS, sent to State Board of Education, and at the State Board, they then sort that information out and provide information that is specific to each local education agency. So, so that the school district will only get the children who live within their district. And this is probably the first semi-formal process that takes place to make sure that we have a smooth and effective transition and that we don't have any children that fall through the cracks. Okay. So along with the timeline, at least by no later than a child 6 months before they turn 3, the service coordinator needs to start that formal process of getting consent, talking about transition, and really getting the family to say, yes, I want to move forward with looking at the school district. So if the child is eligible and the service coordinator gets consent, then you know that you're collecting current IFSP, current evaluations, and you're going to be sending those on to whomever is the recipient at the local education agency. Okay. Also then, this is when you're going to start updating that PA 34. So if you have your PA 34, you know that this is going to be one of the first things that you're going to add is the date that you have sent transition tracking forms and information to the local education agency. Okay, you're probably going to be going back and forth to the PA 34, which most of you know, several times during these last 6 months to update information. All right. So service coordinators have talked to the family, said, well, we're getting 6 months here. We need to start really seriously thinking about the future. And the parents then have a few options. So parents might refuse and say, I don't want you to send any information to the school district. I'm just not ready to do that. I've heard things, whatever their reason might be. They may just decide to refuse. Or the parent this might be the parent that has decided to refuse and then change their mind later on. So parents do have some options. They don't have to send their information on. They can refuse. If they do refuse, you need to provide that information and update that in the PA 34. Also, this is probably a really good time to solicit the support of the early interventionists that are working with that child. When we do the transition trainings with throughout the state, one of the things that we talk about with the providers who are participating in those trainings, that they need to also know what options are available in the community. They also need to be very positive and supportive about the options for families. And since they are the ones that are in working with those families, probably closer than the service coordinators are, they can really be a strong support to help families make that decision. And this really is what it is. This is an opportunity for families to make an informed decision about the next steps for their child. When families refuse, they need to understand what it is that they're refusing. And so as service coordinators, one of the best things that you can do for families when you are at this point is to encourage them to follow the process all the way through. Once that child has been determined eligible or ineligible, but in this case eligible for services, then if they decide, I don't want my child to go to school, then at least they're making an informed decision. Up until that point, they're making a decision based on what they know at this particular time, which isn't really a lot. So do your best to encourage families to see the process through. Right. So some procedural things. So if the parent consents, you are going to need to obtain the written consent on the consent to release information form, and then share that information with the local education and other community programs. Okay. Let's see. Looks like we have another poll here. Looks like, is parental consent required to share anything beyond child information with the school district? True or false? Child find information is the name, birth date, contact information. So beyond that, let's see what we get. All right. Well, it is true. Parental consent is required to share anything beyond that basic child find information. So parents need to understand that if they refuse, we cannot share anything, so that if they change their mind later date, this just makes things go a little bit more, makes things a little bit more complicated. So we do need to try to do what we can to get that consent. Thank you. All right, about the consent. So there is a note in the procedure manual, and it's highlighted here in the pink, is that when you are getting the consent for release of information, date the end date of that release 3 months after the child turns 3, past the child's 3rd birthday. That way, if there are things that need to take place and the child has already turned 3, but you're still having to do some final pieces to it, you can still have that communication open with the school district. A lot of this has to do with if you're not getting the placement information, eligibility information from the school district. If you haven't gotten that in order to update your PA 34, you have to have that consent to be able to have that conversation with families. So make sure you are starting to date your consent 3 months after the child's 3rd birthday. Okay. once you have that consent, in addition to sending the packet to the LEA, you're also going to be sending a copy of the Part B Educational Rights and Responsibilities, Understanding Education in Illinois, to the family. This is also that opportunity where you are probably providing the family with the When I'm 3, Where Will I Be book, so that they can also start working through that on their own. And, you know, if you haven't, I know every one of you have probably touched that book and given it to numerous families. But if you haven't opened it up for a while, and just kind of look at it again and see the things that it can, the information that it does provide. Look at it with some fresh eyes and use that to support families as they work through this process to make that informed decision. It really is a good book, and families who use that book and work through it do feel like they are getting even that just a little extra support. And we do try to encourage EI interventionists to ask families about that book and to help them go through some of that as well. So in addition to giving a copy of the educational rights, which is part of procedure and is something that you have to do, the When I'm 3 book is also a very important piece to add with that. So if a child whose parent provides consent and then they exit prior to 3, so they've moved, they've closed, whatever, however, but they have left EI prior to turning 3, you will need to notify the local education agency prior to closing the child's case so that they know that as well. If the child exits out, again, the rights that are protected change. So they need to understand the potential consequences of exiting out. Some of those are not going to be helped, but some of them might be. Just make sure that you are notifying the local education agency prior to closing that child's case. Okay. So here's back to that definition. If a toddler that might be eligible for Part B, which is that 27 months, who hasn't yet reached or maintained any of their outcomes, if that parent declines a referral to the LEA, document it in your case notes and update the PA 34. So you will, in your PA 34, you have a section where you can indicate if the parent has declined the transition packet to the LEA. And if they have declined, you need to put the date and update your case notes. Your case notes here are going to be, they're always important, but they're going to be especially important for documenting some of the things that the PA 34 isn't necessarily going to be able to document. Specifically, maybe some of the reasons, or maybe there's some back and forth. Maybe they've decided and then they haven't, and you need to be able to document each of those conversations and to what has happened. Okay. So that all works well if the child has been with you for a while, before they've turned 3, if they've been with you. But what about those kiddos who are referred late? So there are a couple of different timelines here that we've been operating under for the last year or so that need to be pointed out and are effective now with the new procedure manual coming out. So for children that are referred 46 to 90 days before their 3rd birthday, pretty much everything that you've done for any other child still has to take place. You still have to do the initial evaluations and assessments. You still have to have the IFSP meeting within 45 days of referral, and we need to start services. So that hasn't changed. Okay, we still need to go through the eligibility and get services started. What does change is that you will need to start that transition process immediately. So you are going to get the consent to release information. You're going to update the PA-34 in the transition tracking form as well. The only thing that isn't part of that is that a transition planning conference doesn't have to be held. We haven't talked yet about the transition planning conference, but in a nutshell, you have to have a transition planning conference that includes the LEA and others, which I will talk about, prior to 90 days before the child turns 3. So if that child is referred to you 46 to 90 days before they're 3, there's no way you can meet that requirement. So that is the only difference between any other child that is referred that you don't have to meet. So hopefully that's clear. All right. Well, that's great, but what about those really, really late referrals? Those kids who come to us, to early intervention, referred 45 days or less before their 3rd birthday. So this is a kiddo that no matter how fast, how good we are, we're not going to get things going before they turn 3. So we need to explain to families that, that we're not required to go through the process. We need to explain to them the pros and cons. I mean, it is their choice. If they choose to pursue it, I mean, we can, but they need to understand the consequences, the potential benefits, and the challenges of pursuing early intervention services in that short period of time. The thing that we also need to do is go back to that definition of children who are potentially eligible for Part B services. So again, this would be a child who it looks like they are potentially eligible. If that is the case for these late referrals, we need to attempt to get written consent from the families to share information to the LEA to let them know, hey, we got this really late referral. Here's what we know. Can you get started? Also, we need to notify the EI data manager to let them know that this child has arrived in, at least has made contact with our system. Right. In doing that, you're completing the childhood EI tracking form. You're sending a copy of that tracking form and any other information that you have to the LEA, and you're updating the PA-34 with all of that information. So this is where your case notes really are going to come in and be very important, because there's a lot of things that are probably going to happen, a lot of conversations that are going to be had that can't be captured on a PA-34 or an EI tracking form. So you need to make sure you're documenting very, very well the conversation that you're having with families about the benefits and challenges of pursuing early intervention eligibility. You need to have really good case notes about the conversation of getting consents to release information. That information may be as minimal as name and diagnosis. But we have, in order to share any diagnosis information, we do have to have a consent from families. So this might be a change than your current practice. So, all right. I don't know how much more I can say about that, but I'm going to keep going. Okay. Moving on to notification. So at least 90 days before a child's 3rd birthday, the transition notification is sent from DHS to ISB. This is that 27-month list. This is how Illinois and our systems have decided to meet the federal requirements of notifying the school districts of children. We've done that through the 27-month list. Okay. That information, again, is the basic child find information. So this is the information that we can share without consent. So this is that child's name, date of birth, and parent contact information. That happens at 27 months as part of the federal child find processes. Okay. If for those children that are referred 45 to 90 days before their 3rd birthday, the information is entered into Cornerstone, and DHS then sends that information about these children to ISB so that they can disseminate that to their local education agencies as well. So their list of children is updated with these late referrals. For those children who are referred fewer than 45 days, if you can get consent to share information, then that information gets shared to the LEA. If you can't get consent, then you still need to notify the EI data manager that of the basic child find information. So that would be the name, birth date, and the parent's contact information, so that the EI data manager can notify State Board ISB. So this is also probably kind of a little bit of, that's that change that I referred to earlier here. So this is part of the child find process, making sure that there are no children that fall through the cracks. You're going to be sharing information about the local education agency with the family, but you also are going to need to share some basic information with the EI data manager. Right. In your PA34, there is an option for delays in some of these things, but your case notes, again, are also going to be very important here, where you're documenting any exceptional family circumstances that may delay in providing any consent for any of these things that we're talking about. So your documentation is going to be your lifesaver, and you need to make sure that you bone up on are you documenting enough? Because the one thing that you don't want to happen is that it comes back to you and you say, well, I know I did it, but there's nothing in your notes. So just make sure that you are keeping your case notes and that PA34 up to date. So there's a few new things in that last little bit that I have shared, and it looks like this is probably a good opportunity to stop and see what questions. I have not been really following them, so I'll let Susan
Sure. I just wanted
off.
to kind of repeat one of the questions just to make sure. I know some people watch the chat box, some people don't. So one of the CFCs had said that they have not been sending social work reports to the LEA because it includes HIPAA-protected information about the parents and the family, not just HIPAA-protected information about the child, and they were referring specifically to psych reports. Anne's response was that it appears to be a valid decision, but that the Bureau is going to go ahead and reach out to Part B to determine if there's anything specific that we need to be doing related to that to best support the transition, but without divulging that confidential information. I think the other question that came up was related to sharing the EI, the Educational Rights and Responsibilities booklet with parents, and it was, is it appropriate or is it okay to be that Education Rights and Responsibilities booklet, sharing of that booklet, be written in as a strategy on the IFSP related to transition? And then the second part of that question was, is it okay to list one of the EI providers directly associated with that strategy? So I am going to go ahead and allow Anne to answer that one.
Thank you, Susan. I would think, we are charged as a Part C program, meaning, us, the service coordinators, the Bureau of the program, to work the transition through. We want the team's involvement. That's very important. The support that all the team can bring for a family is very vital. My concern about making it sounds, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, and I apologize if I am, but I like the idea of there being a strategy for a transition plan on the IFSP to go through that book or any other supporting information for a family pertaining to transition to Part B. But I kind of think it really needs to be us taking the charge. We could do it with the help of all of the providers on the team or any other available resources for the family, but I kind of think it's our charge to do that. I could work with Part B to see if they can give me any other guidance on that and maybe put that out in the FAQ, but my gut reaction is it really needs to be our charge to do that.
Thanks, Anne. And we did have one other question that isn't listed, excuse me, my mouth is not working today, in the main room chat box, but I received it privately. And it was a clarification, Anne, on, so in the event that a family does not sign consent, so that the service coordinator cannot move forward with sharing the IFSP and other evaluation or assessment reports, they understand that the LEA or the school district gets that basic child find information, but is the school district then going to contact the family anyway? And is there anything that the service coordinator should be preparing the family for in the event that they have not signed consent?
Good question, and I want to, I'd have to confirm, I do believe there is language in the booklet from Part B that kind of explains that yes, they will reach out to that family, because just as we are charged with our child find for any child before they turn 3 to determine their eligibility, so is Part B. So when they get a child who turns 3, they're charged with finding every Illinois citizen who's age 3 and up, or 3 to 22, and determine their eligibility, based on any information they could get through any other child find resource such as us. So telling the family or explaining that to them, maybe during the transition plan or that meeting, to say, hey, we acknowledge your decision, but as part of child find by law, we will be giving basic information. You have the right to say no, you're not interested, but understand they're there to support you and the needs of your child as well. So if you do have any other questions, they'd be a great resource. Just encourage that family, again, to help their child as much as possible. We're there to support them. So is Part B. Child find is the law, and we will be sending it, and they will, yes, be reaching out to that family.
And along with that, when a family does refuse the referral, there is that letter that the service coordinators give to parents, letting them know that that information is, there's still that certain information that's been shared, and the potential that the school district is going to call them. On the Part B side, they have a similar letter that if they haven't heard from a child on that 27-month list, and that child is getting close to aging out, they have a letter that they send to families as well. Again, letting them know that they know their child's out there. They want to give them the opportunity if they have changed their mind to move forward with the referral process. Just kind of letting them know that we are here, and so there is that written communication that comes through them as well. Okay.
Awesome, thank you.
Any others?
No, it looks like those were the only questions at this point, so I think you can move on to the next section.
All right, thank you. And keep your questions coming in the chat box so that we can have them for our next break. So let's see, moving on. The transition plan, I think it looks like Lynn has kind of made has written something in the chat box about some things that we can write into the transition plan. So first things first, the service coordinator should schedule that and facilitate an IFSP meeting to update that transition plan. That was that meeting that I talked about in that, toward the very beginning, that one that's close to their, after their second birthday, but before 2 years, 6 months. That's probably going to be either an annual or a 6-month review. But during that particular IFSP meeting, the team has a charge to talk about transition and come up with some definitive steps and things and activities that are going to take place during this period of time for transition. This meeting has to be held no later than 90 days to the child's third birthday. That can be held, within that period of time. So the transition plan, there has to be a transition plan in the IFSPs for all children exiting the EI program. So remember, the transition plan doesn't just have to talk about transition plan into a school setting. It can also talk about transition plans into other settings as well. And maybe it's a option A, option B. So maybe the parents aren't sure about school and they want to also think about some other things. That all needs to be kind of incorporated into that transition plan. Thinking maybe a little bit beyond what is written in policy and procedure as far as steps, and thinking about what other things might be part to make that transition plan really meaningful to those families and rich with information. So as part of that transition plan, some of the things that you could talk about in addition to future plans, any kind of preparations that the family or the child might need to function in that new setting. So within that transition plan might be to schedule a visit to go visit an early childhood classroom, or maybe it is to have the parents go and let their child go to the school and explore a bus. Some families have some big issues about putting their child on a school bus. Another thing is that we can confirm and document and check mark that we have completed a few steps, like sending off that child find tracking form. Also making sure that we have sent the packet off. So anything that's going to help facilitate and make that transition smooth should be part of that written plan that is part of the IFSP meeting. So with the family's consent, again, on your PA34, you have a place where parents consent to have a transition planning conference. If the family consents, we schedule a transition planning conference. Now, this is different than the IFSP because the transition planning conference has some other aspects to it. The thing about this, though, is that the timelines for the transition planning conference, again, are similar to those IFSP timelines. It has to be held no later than 90 days prior to the child turning 3. But when we start getting to that 90-day period of time, now you're starting to have a couple of things that might overlap. So maybe that transition planning conference is going to be held on its own, and it's something that you've worked out with the school district and how that's going to look, whether it's going to be at a school site or maybe it's going to be where the special ed coordinator comes into the family's home. Every part of the state does it differently, and they all have their pros and cons as to which way works best. But you can also combine these transition planning conferences with some other pieces of other meetings. So maybe you're combining that transition planning conference with that 6-month review or annual review that is in that period of time, before the 2 years, 6 months. You might combine it with that. Or you could combine it with an exit IFSP. The exit IFSPs have to occur no earlier than 120 days prior to the child's 3rd birthday. So you have a month window. There's that 120 days that you can start having exits. That's the 90 days that you have to have a transition planning conference held. So you might have some combination in there. if you do combine these meetings, you need to make it very clear which part of the meeting is the IFSP meeting and which part of the meeting is the Transition Planning Conference, because they both serve different purposes. The Transition Planning Conference is to provide some information about Part B services and some other things that I'm going to share. The IFSP meeting is to talk about child outcomes, the IFSP outcomes and levels of development. And the Exit IFSP meeting is to look at what has the child accomplished, what are their strengths during this time in early intervention, and looking at those final child outcomes measurements. So IFSP meetings serve a different purpose. The Transition Planning Conference, its purpose is unique in that the Transition Planning Conference is an opportunity for the local education agency to provide a description about eligibility for Part B services, which again are very different than early intervention, to give them information about the timelines and the things that they're going to have to take place in determining the eligibility, the meetings that have to take place, all of those things that are the responsibility of Part B, and then looking at some of the other options in addition to special education and related services. So this is the opportunity for the LEA to kind of step in and say, hello, I'm going to be your new partner now. Here's what we're about, and start making that handoff between the two systems. So by law, the LEA is required to attend, and I'm not going to blow anybody's bubble if I say that doesn't always happen. It is required by law. And the best thing that you can do if it doesn't happen is to make sure that you've documented in your case notes that you've made reasonable efforts to obtain the LEA participation. That doesn't mean that you just say, I left them a message, they didn't get back with me, and so they didn't participate. You need to make effort to get them to participate in this, which means that you probably need to have some communication with the local education agency outside of individual children situations to develop that relationship so that you will have consistent LEA participation. I will tell you, when we do these statewide trainings with StarNet on transition, we hear it both sides. We hear that the LEA will say, well, I never got invited, I didn't know when it was. Or they'll say, I tried to get the service coordinator to come, and the service coordinator didn't come. So, I mean, we hear it all different ways all over the state of what it might look like. Primarily and the majority of the time, it works well. And the communication has worked, and the process works. But in those instances that it doesn't, you do need to make a reasonable effort to get the attendance and document it. So I don't know what more I can say about that, but they need to be there. The things that you can do in addition to the other things that I've mentioned is also look at the registration process. The school district can share the information about the registration process, make sure the families are understanding that information, and also they can work on writing a transition plan as well that is specific for the Part B part of that. If you're not familiar with what is occurring in your communities as far as the options related to the school district, it's really hard for you as a service coordinator or CFC staff to have this meeting without that LEA. So if in your area that seems to be a problem, I would strongly encourage you to make sure that you are providing the families with current, accurate information about their options. Find out what the school districts offer, find out what other services are available in your community so that you're giving them, you're helping them make informed decisions to move further on. Let's see. All right, so it looks like we have another audience poll, and this is one where we're just kind of curious as to how do you learn about the Part B services in your area? Do you do that through what the special ed coordinator shares during transition during transition planning conferences? That's not one of the options, so sorry, forget that one. Do you do it at transition trainings? Do you get information from transition trainings? Do you get it at any IEP or transition meetings? Or is your parent liaison or the service coordinators, do you have some that really know and share that information with you? So I'll give you some time to look at the choices and answers, and if you learn about the services in your communities in a different way, please use the chat box to let us know, because then we can take that information and share that across the state, because that might be of benefit to somebody, some other service coordinator. So, well, I'm not seeing any more answers come in, so it looks like strongly that you're getting it in a variety of different ways, which is great, because then you're hearing different aspects of that information as well. So again, thanks for sharing. And if you are, oh, I like that, inviting speakers to staff meetings and LIC meetings. So, you know, one of the things that we know is that if you're struggling developing a relationship with a partner in the system, invite them to come talk to them at a meeting, and that seems to help. So another thing here, and this is kind of, I'm just going to throw it out because it's a strategy that we use, is take a look in the LIC meetings at the transition plan. That's just a strategy. The transition agreements between early intervention and early childhood, and that might be an opportunity to help smooth that relationship to make that transition a little bit more seamless. So just a thought out there. Some of the responsibilities of Part B in determining eligibility is that it is determined by the local education agency. So we don't determine eligibility for Part B services, they determine it. And their process is different, and you can go, again, across the state and hear how different school districts kind of do different things. They are guided by categories of eligibility, but how they determine that eligibility can look a little different between each school district. The key here, because this child is part of early intervention, is that it must be determined prior to the 3rd birthday. Here are some of the key differences that we see between the two programs, and the ones that I really want to highlight is that the Part B has eligibility based on 14 categories. One of those categories is developmental delay, and by far most of the children who are eligible for Part B services are found eligible under developmental delay. And what has changed in the last several years, it's been many years now, but at one point the school districts could use that developmental delay eligibility up till age 6, and that was changed so they can use that up to age 9. So those families who might be hesitant about making a referral to a school district because they don't want their child labeled, this would be a piece that you could share, as that might be one of the eligibility criteria. Most school districts aren't going to make a child eligible unless it's very, very clear. One of the other ones that they do use somewhat often is other health impairment. So if the child has got some medical issues, they might use that one as well. But for families who have concerns about labeling, these aren't really any different terms than what we use already in early intervention. So you can put that out there. At risk is not a category of eligibility for Part B services. So for any children that we have eligible under at-risk in early intervention, families need to know that that might not be the case for Part B. We know in early intervention we provide services in the natural environment, and in the local education agency they're provided in the least restrictive environment. This also is important because of where we have our meetings. So in early intervention, when we have IFSP meetings, we have to have them in a place that's convenient for the family and the time and place and all that, and in a natural environment. And in the school district, that they don't have to have that meeting in that family's natural environment. They have them in the school setting, or they don't have to have them in the family's natural environment. Many choose to do so. Many school district personnel want to come to your IFSP meetings because they learn things that they don't necessarily learn any other way. But when you're looking at trying to schedule that transition planning conference, one of your barriers might be just the location of where these meetings are taking place. So if that seems to be a problem, that might be something that you want to investigate. Another barrier, which this isn't the slide for barriers, but it's what comes to mind, so I'm going to share it here, is the notice. We hear this from school districts, we hear it from EI providers, and we hear it from service coordinators that they weren't given adequate notice. They might have been contacted the day before and told that we're having a transition planning conference. So however that is scheduled and done, we need to make sure that we are providing enough notice that we can get full participation from all the parties that need to be there. So here we go. Meetings are held at time and place convenient for families. So there you go. I jumped ahead. That's what I get for not looking at my slides. So making sure that there is a proper notice, that's the highlight on this slide. For the transition planning meeting and transition planning conference, we need to make sure that the contents of the transition plan are fully explained. Checking for understanding, that seems to be here. Here's where I want to get. For the IFSP meeting to develop the transition plan, that would be the plan that is part of the IFSP document, these individuals need to be a part of that process. The parent or parents, other family members if the parents request, an advocate or person outside the family if the parent requests, the service coordinator, persons directly involved in conducting evaluations, and persons who will be providing EI services to the family. So the only ones there that are by request are other family members or advocates. Otherwise, the parent, the service coordinator, whoever's directly involved in conducting the evaluations, and the EI providers need to be a part of the IFSP meeting. That's true of any IFSP meeting. This one just happens to be one that we're going to be developing a plan, a transition plan. Okay, so that's nothing new there. And that process hasn't changed with getting the providers to participate in that IFSP, making sure that you're making reasonable effort, and that the EI provider is also making reasonable accommodation to try to participate in that meeting, either through telephone conference or other means. So this part here is not any different than what you've already that has already been in procedure and policy. The transition planning conference, which again can be a standalone meeting, has the same participants that are present for IFSP meetings with one addition, and that is the LEA representative. So this might be something that is might be considered new, and that is getting the providers participating in the transition planning conferences. So if you're having your transition planning conferences in the school, and they are every Tuesday from, sometimes they're scheduled on a particular day of the week that is consistent throughout your CFC, providers need to be attending these, at least the person directly involved in conducting the evaluations and supports and providing services to that child and family. So this is an addition. This is something that has been clarified in policy in the new procedure manual. So it is very important that you are letting the EI providers know, giving them proper notice so they can participate. The difference between the transition plan meeting and the transition planning conference, the transition plan meeting is part of that IFSP meeting. It's the IFSP meeting where you're developing a transition plan, a formal transition plan. The transition planning conference is where the LEA is providing an opportunity to explain about Part B services and eligibility, the registration process of the school, all of those things that are important for the next steps. So they really are two different things. If a provider is not available to participate in the transition planning meeting, a report can be provided, but somebody has to be there in order to interpret that report, and that is a different person than the service coordinator. So this is going to be something that you are going to need to talk with your IFSP teams about, making sure that they are part of this process as well. This is a great opportunity for your EI providers to also learn about what services are available in their local communities related to Part B and other services. So it really is a great opportunity. It's just going to be maybe a little bit of a change. They won't notice it if you've been combining these meetings with IFSP meetings. The only difference there is that you just need to kind of delineate which part is the IFSP and which part is the transition planning conference. But if it's a standalone transition planning conference, there needs to be persons directly involved in conducting the evaluations and assessments, and persons who are providing EI services present at that meeting. If the child is not potentially eligible or the family declines, we still need to convene a conference to let the parents understand that there are other options out there. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have a meeting if the family decides not to transition into Part B services. We still need to make reasonable effort to convene a transition planning conference, because it's not just about Part B in school. It is about other options that are available to them as well. So there still needs to be a transition planning conference that's held, at least making reasonable efforts to convene a conference. I've talked about these, so I don't know that there's anything new here. Some of the other options, private preschools, and for some of those private preschools, you got to plan far in advance for the participation in those as well, which is why we start that process early. There might be some other programs that are at risk, or pre-kindergarten. There might be some tuition-based programs. There might be some grant-funded programs that are available to families. Private therapy. Some families choose to continue to receive therapeutic services through private means after their child turns 3. Some families choose to do no services whatsoever. So I mean, but that all needs to be kind of planned out. Even if the family chooses to do transition into no services whatsoever, it is an abrupt stop if they've been getting services once a week, especially if they've been getting services once a week from multiple interventionists. That is a huge change in their life if they've decided not to continue on after that child turns 3, and there needs to be some planning to help families understand that process. Okay, so we are at a point again where we can stop and see if there were any other questions. I haven't really been looking at following. So
I was going to say, I think you actually, just in planning through the content, you answered the last 2 questions that came up. And there was a final comment about that some LEAs are available exclusively by phone for the Transition Planning Conference. And so it's just, I think, going to be follow-up. I think we need to do our due diligence in early intervention to give notice and invite and see what we can do to get people, to the table. And it'd be nice for the families to be able to meet the LEA personnel face-to-face, but we just kind of keep pushing along. It's important that they get the information. So it'll be something that DHS continues to work with the State Board of Ed on to make sure that both sides are, kind of doing their due diligence and getting to these transition planning conferences.
Sounds great. Okay. All right. Well, it doesn't look like there's nothing else, and I'm going to wrap us up. And some other things that are specific to your
Maria.
Yes.
Maria, I'm sorry, Anne, I was just going to pass it to Anne for a second to see if she had any other final comments on this section before we move to the last little section.
Fair enough.
Thank you, guys. I think you really did lay it out. It's just important to realize that not a lot has really changed. It's still basically 3 processes, and I think the new manual actually separated them out better for understanding and knowing that we have the transition notification, which really DHS does for you, the transition plan in the IFSP, and the transition planning conference. That's what we're charged with. I think they're laid out very well in the manual, and I thank the CFCs who participated in that part as well to help us get the better language. I think you're explaining it very well. Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope everyone else is feeling the same. So, I do, before I get to these last little slides, I do want to just kind of put a personal note here in that, if you think about any transition that you as an individual have personally made, and the things that you've done to prepare yourself for those transitions, put yourself, take yourself from that place and think about how that parent is. You know all about the things that are happening in the school district. Most of you do. But this is brand new to these families, for many of our families. And it's a scary thing. When you've got a child that you've had at home with you for 3 years or had such strong early intervention supports for 3 years, and now we're going to make a big change. It is huge. And so anything that we can do as supports and resources for these families to make it easier. None of this stuff is to make your job any harder. It's to make it easier for the families. And depending on how you approach it will depend on how successful you are with this process. So with that being said, we are going to move on to the last little bit here. And the EITP, Early Intervention to Early Childhood Tracking Form. If it hasn't been sent to the LEA prior, with the release of information in the IFSP, it does need to be sent by that transition planning conference time. So there's 2 sections. Section 1 is all service coordinator responsibility. The section 2 is what the LEA or the school district fills out as they've gone through their eligibility determination process, and then they send that back to you. When it's returned from the LEA, you update the information in the PA-34 and then keep a copy in the child's permanent record. Okay. There were a couple of questions about the PA-34 yesterday, and that it is editable. The only thing that once you have a date entered that you've put that you've sent the early interventions or early childhood tracking form to the LEA, once you have that date entered, that cannot be changed. But some of these other things can be updated. The PA34, once it's started, that's it. You can't have multiple PA34s out there, but the information can be updated, and along with the information that's updated will go your documentation and your case notes to make sure that the story is full about the events that have taken place during the transition process time. If the transition tracking form isn't returned within 20 days of the child's 3rd birthday, you do need to call the LEA and determine the status and document that call, because we do need to get that final piece of information into Cornerstone so that we can pull the data and make sure that child hasn't slipped through the cracks, and then we can pull the data to see where how we're doing, which we all like to see data, don't we? I don't know. I do. On the child's 3rd birthday, as soon as possible, that is why you have those consents that go 3 months after the child's 3rd birthday, and you need to make sure that all the case closure information and documentation activities are completed. So again, just making sure that you've wrapped everything up. Okay. I did happen to catch a comment here in the chat box that you just edit the PA34. There aren't multiple PA34s. You just edit the one that you have. That's why your case notes are extremely important. So if a family says, yeah, I want you to send my information, and then they change their mind, and then they change it back, because we've all worked with families that flip-flop back and forth depending on who they've talked to in the last week. So you just keep your case notes current with the information that you have, and edit the PA34 as appropriate. Some tips. One of the last little pieces that we wanted to share with you were tips for helping the families get through, and I think we've covered a lot in the last hour and 20 minutes that we've been talking, or I've been talking, you've been listening. And some of those things are the field trip to the school, helping families understand their rights, attending transition training. The StarNet puts together, StarNet and Early Intervention Training Program put together statewide transition trainings. I've seen many of you at them. Great, thank you so much. If you haven't been to one for a while, may I recommend that you check it out again. Things do change, information does change, but there are other benefits to attending any one of the statewide transition trainings, and that is that you are attending those trainings with your Part B partners, and that's a great way of, again, helping to facilitate and helping to develop that relationship with your Part B partners, and kind of being able to see it from both sides. It's really surprising how much we don't know about our other partner systems, and we learn a lot about that in those transition trainings. So I do encourage you to check some out. I know there's one in Moline tomorrow, and there's one in Springfield coming up, and there's others that can be found on the EI Training Program's website. The last tip there is to be positive. We've all had horror stories about transition, and those are the things that stick in our mind. But for every horror story that we've had about a transition, there are multiple positive experiences. And so remember that when you're working with the families, is to stay positive. For children who are typical developing, an opportunity to expand their horizons happens. Most of the kids, they may not go to school at 3, but they start interacting with other peers. They might go to child care or preschool, or their world just gets bigger. For our children who have disabilities and developmental delays, their world should get bigger too. And being positive about moving on to other programs can help families see that. Last little bit here, we have some additional resources. The links are active. You can click on those. Well, I say that. I think they are. But this PowerPoint, you'll get a link to the PowerPoint that you can, after this training's over, and all of these resources will be listed in there as well. Some other places that you can go. I also encourage you to go to the EI Training Program's website and look at the resources that we have available on transition. And we have a lot as well. And with that, I'm just going to see if there are any other final questions that we have.
Thanks, Maria. I don't think there's any other final questions. There was some discussion in the chat box. For those of you who may or may not have seen it, there was some discussion about the differences between the transition plan that is developed at the IFSP meeting versus the transition planning conference. And it is pretty well laid out in the procedure manual. And Maria, I know you talked about it, but Anne, is there anything you'd like to say specifically about those two?
Well, I think, like I said, I agree with you. It is laid out very well, I believe, in the manual. They are separate functions. Like I said earlier, there are 3 things we're charged with: the notification, to have the plan in the IFSP, and then also to have a transition planning conference with Part B. Obviously, we understand in today's economy, we want to try to combine things. Families are busy, we're busy. It makes sense to try to combine things, and you're more than welcome to do that. And whatever works out for you between your families and your LEAs, like I said, you know your resources in your local communities. But they are 2 separate, functions that you are encouraged, or not encouraged, I should say. You are welcome to combine if that works out for everybody. But if not, they can also be separate, things that we have to perform.
Thanks, Anne. I don't see any other questions. I was just kind of reviewing the chat box one last time before we moved on, but I don't think I see any other questions. Maria, do you have any final thoughts before we?
I just want to say I appreciate your time sitting and listening to somebody talk for an hour and a half. I know that can be difficult, and this isn't the most sexy conversation to have about transitions, but it is important, and it is an important part of your job, and it's important to the family. So I just appreciate you taking the time to learn some more about it, and I encourage you to pull up your procedure manual and refamiliarize yourself with the new transition section. Of course, they will say to look at all of the procedure manual, which you will need to do, but we're talking about transition today, so I would encourage you to look at section 13 and see what else is in there. That's it.
Thanks a lot, Maria. I appreciate you presenting today, and Anne, thank you for being available to answer questions as they arose. Just wanted to put up the survey is in the chat box currently, so again, you can click on it right there. Or all of the CFC managers will receive an email with the link to the survey, so you can just forward that on to your personnel. We ask that you guys complete that as soon as possible, but not later than Sunday evening, so that we can get all of the certificates for the continuing professional development out to everybody by the end of next week. Okay? If you have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me. I know I've been talking specifically with some people over the past couple weeks, and I've been sharing questions back with the Bureau when new questions do arise. So please feel free to keep that communication open. I know that the Bureau expects it as well. So thanks everybody for your time, and that's it. Our webinar has ended. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.